The telephone, from Alexander Graham Bell until now. 1876. Alexander Graham Bell successfully spoke his first words over the telephone. The infamous, "Mr. Watson, come here, I want you." He demonstrated the telephone at the Philadelphia Centennial Exhibition. Many were interested in his invention, and it even received a medal. With these first telephones, one had to shout to hear. They were not very clear, and there was no bell or buzzer to alert the caller of a phone call, just a simple click click or tap tap. 1877, Bell and his colleagues formed the first telephone company, Bell Telephone Company. They began to make and sell telephones and were very successful. This company later became known as American Telephone and Telegraph, or as we know today, AT&T, a company in which John Brooks, the author of Telephone First 100 Years, refers to as a monopoly. The impact on society at this time? At first, people did not take the telephone seriously. It served merely entertainment purposes. However, soon banks and newspapers began using them to convey information more quickly. This soon gave the telephone much popularity. People were wanting them in their homes, but costs were rather expensive for the ordinary folks. 1880 to 1900, long distance was established using metallic circuits. These metallic circuits connected one specific city to another. For example, from Boston to Providence, Rhode Island, which was only about 45 miles apart. Party lines became available so that people could share a line and then split the cost of the line. Direct dialing system was patented during this time so that a switchboard would no longer be needed to make calls. Also during this era, specifically 1890, the development of the first underground wires happened, which is going to make a huge difference in the way telephone calls are made. In 1892, there was approximately 240,000 phones in service. Only 7 years later, in 1899, there were over 800,000. Impact on society? Grocery stores and many other places of business were able to place orders more quickly. And along with the underground wires, the ever-darkening forest of wires and poles in the cities were beginning to diminish, and they were not interrupted by winter storms. Blizzards and ice storms wouldn't affect the phone calls, therefore less interruption meant clearer phone calls. From 1900 to 1920, the first transcontinental telephone call took place. This happened on January 25, 1915, from New York to San Francisco. The line was officially opened with a special conversation between Alexander Graham Bell and Mr. Watson. They say that the telephone call sounded very similar to the original very first telephone call. Air-to-ground radio equipment was developed during this time and used extensively by American pilots. Also, U.S. Navy ships installed radio telephones aboard ships. Impact on society. Long distance became what some might call a necessity to many, and communication time was greatly reduced between continents, which made a huge impact on war times. Telephones and radios became the main source of U.S. Army communications. They came to depend on the telephones and radios. And then also many lives were saved at sea because the captain was able to call for help in case of storms or wrecks or any sort of emergency. Also during this time, women were able to become involved in the war times as they were the ones that were being hired to be the telephone operators here and overseas. These are two pictures that I found, models of what phones used to be, one from dating around 1913 and one dating around 1919. You can kind of see how far we have come. Now we're moving on to 1920 to 1940. Bell engineers were working on a machine that would synchronize sound with motion picture, and as we all know, this machine is going to take the entertainment industry by storm. Ship passengers were able to phone relatives ashore, which is going to make a huge difference in time to pick up your relatives. Telephone answering machines were invented. Also during this time, something called French handsets became available, and this just kind of shows us that the devices that are being invented to go with the phone are becoming more popular. Also, the coaxial cable was being installed, and that made it possible for the Republican National Convention in Philadelphia to be televised and seen in New York. So because of this boom in telephony and the economic conditions of these years, prices of the telephone services were decreasing for the consumer, as well as time to receive phone services and make and receive phone calls was also decreasing. Impact on society. As I started to say before, time frames for relatives picking up travelers and shipmen were more accurate, reducing wait time, which kind of is moving to our no wait society that we have now. No, we don't want to wait on anything. Progress of the picture telephones greatly increases camera production and introduces a new method for flash. Brooks, the author of the book Telephone, The First 100 Years, he refers to this era as the third stage. To quote, he says that the telephone, it had come to be treated as a necessary and ever-present artifact in human intercourse. So during this time, despite the Great Depression, as you can see, many advances were made. (1940 to 1960), surprisingly to me, automobile telephones were introduced. This mobile phone linked a moving vehicle to the telephone network by radio. Also, the transistor was invented. This is a semiconductor device used to amplify or switch electric signals. Without this device, Brooks says that the modern world would be radically different. There would be no computer industry on the current scale, no communication satellites, or no trips by man to the moon. Also during this time, touch-tone telephone is introduced, which we know is a necessity nowadays when we make a phone call to a business. Press 1 for English. Impact on society. Making calls becomes increasingly convenient, yet at the same time a source of frustration. In Brooks' book, he once again points out that during the post-war time, people associated the telephone with their frustrations, fears, and powerlessness against technology. Also during this time, the Army came to depend on the new technology being developed as well. People depended on the telephones as their connection to the war. Bell's labs were continually inventing new ways of communication and new devices to be used by the Army, but a lot of them weren't publicized because they were known as a wartime secret. They didn't want the word getting out. Also then, calls can be made more quickly than with the rotary dialing because of the touch-tone phone.